through a major thing with my accountant, and I was really gunning for the IRS. They are in my crosshairs. That's a $10 billion a year industry that needs to go out of business. The sooner the better. So yes, you're right. The reason I wanted to tell you about my background is because I've always been sensitive to any tax proposal. And even as a Republican and as a Republican governor, I wanted to make sure that anything we did in terms of, quote, reforming taxes didn't just help people at the top, that it helped people at the bottom. Because I'm just as interested in making sure the guy at the bottom of the ladder has a chance to reach for the next rung as I am that the guy at the top can stay there. And if Republicans don't care about that, Republicans not only will lose, they deserve to lose. If you're not the party of opportunity for everybody, then we're really not the party that Abraham Lincoln and others fought so hard to create. And that's why I became a Republican as a teenager in a state where it wasn't very popular. Being a Republican in my state is a lot like being a fire hydrant in a neighborhood full of dogs. When I was elected lieutenant governor, I was only the fourth Republican elected to statewide office in 150 years. I was the third Republican governor in the history of my state. And the only one ever to serve more than 4 years. And so Arkansas is still a place where 86% of all elected officials are Democrats. When I became governor, one of the things I realized was that what I needed to do was to not focus on trying to push a partisan agenda, but promote something that was good for everybody. And I really believed that the best way to build our party was to build it so that it didn't matter where a person lived and what kind of neighborhood and what kind of background. They realized that our ideas would empower them to make the most of their lives. Government can't do things for us, but government ought not to be our greatest enemy either. There are three things that will cause us to lose jobs and lose capital, the two things we need in this country. We've got to have capital, we've got to have jobs. If you don't have capital, you don't get jobs. And if you don't have jobs, then you won't keep the capital. If you want to lose them, there's a three-step process. Too much taxation, too much regulation, too much litigation. The result is job migration and capital migration. We've lost $10 trillion of U.S. capital that's parked offshore. And the reason it's parked offshore is because our corporate tax structure is such that companies have found very clever, creative, and legal, but yet frustrating ways to get that money that should be in the United States and to take it offshore, where it's now operating, instead of operating in our own economy. The fair tax brings that $10 trillion back to this country, and wouldn't it be something if the United States of America became the tax haven of the world, and that every global international company would say, if we really want to put our money to its best possible use, put it in the United States because that's the most friendly environment for a corporate tax structure. That's what the fair tax does. It not only brings that $10 trillion back, but I believe it becomes a magnet for billions, if not trillions more, of international economic activity that we've desperately needed. And over the years, we've lost. Imagine what happens when every American, when he gets his or her paycheck, opens it up and gets the whole thing. How long has it been since you haven't even really looked? If you're working for wages, which, by the way, if you are, you're the most taxed person in America. That's part of the reason the fair tax is so very important. Now, if you're on the top of the economic spectrum and you don't get wages anymore, you live off your dividends, you don't pay as high a tax rate as all of us working stiffs who get wages or who are self-employed and who really take it in the teeth. The fair tax opens up a whole new world for us because for the first time, we're not going to be taxed for every time we try real hard to earn money. And it's not going to be a disproportionate tax structure, which is what we currently have. But imagine the people who work for wages getting their entire paycheck. Wouldn't that be a sweet day? My daughter's with me. She's 25. She's working in the campaign and worked in Washington a couple of years. But when she got her first job back in high school, I'll never forget when Sarah called and said, Dad, I got my check, but something's wrong. I said, really, what's wrong? She said, they cheated me. And I said, who's they? She said, the people I'm working for. I said, Dad, you won't believe this. I looked at my check and they told me how much I was going to be paid, and I got my check, and there's a bunch of stuff. And what is FICA? What does that mean? And Dad, what is all this stuff they've taken out? And she showed me her check, and about half of it was gone. And I said, welcome to my world, sweetheart. And I said, by the way, welcome to the conservative movement, where she's remained. It takes something like that sometimes to get us there. Yes, John?
Governor, why has the national media pretty much ignored the fair tax issue, other than your appearances on TV?
Which, by the way, I'll be on Fox News in the morning at 11:30 Eastern, and Today's Show Wednesday. And I'm hoping I'll get in, who knows what they ask me, but if I get half a chance, we're going to steer it toward this issue. But I think it's because, number one, they don't get it. And number two, I don't think they want to get it. Beyond that, I don't know. But I think a lot of people have listened to some inaccurate information that's been put out about the fair tax by its opponents and critics. And let's be honest, the fair tax is going to have an enormous amount of opposition from people who have a vested interest in keeping this system where they have some winners and losers, and they get to help pick who the winners are. That's how they stay in business. That's why I said earlier, we have 35,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Do you think they're going to sit back and say, sure, let's have a fair tax. That'll put me out of business, make me actually go do work for a living rather than getting paid to take people to lunch? Of course they're going to fight it. And let me tell you, this movement is not going to happen by initiating it in Congress. And I want to see congressional leaders get behind it, and increasing numbers are. But the truth is, it's going to not be so much that it starts there. It's going to start with folks out here in the real world. And we put it to our congressmen and senators and say to them, here's the deal. We want the fair tax. And if you don't get it, we'll fire you, and we'll hire somebody in these jobs who will get it. So how would you like it? Because when I hear the political arguments, people saying, do you really believe this can happen? Well, I believe this is America, and anything that the people believe in enough and want to have happen, it can. It's not going to happen this week. It's going to take time, effort, leadership, and articulation of the message. But that's why we're here today. Let me tell you what I will tell you. I've talked to literally thousands of people about fair tax in a dozen states. And I talk about it in every speech I give and every time I do a fundraiser or any type of meeting. And I sometimes am waiting to see how many people pounce on me. You know what? Every time I talk about the aspects of the fair tax, people, and not just fair tax people, ordinary people who have never even heard the proposal break out in applause. And interestingly, I've shared it with some of the people who are the wealthiest folks I know, and they love it. And I've shared it with some of the poorest people I know, members of my family, and my friends, and they love it too. And the reason is because when you explain to them, look, here's how it's going to work. You're going to get, if you're at the bottom of the spectrum, the prebate empowers you to be able to keep your income and not be penalized for your groceries and basic necessities. So that's not the problem. And a lot of its critics don't emphasize that. And that's a critical, key point. And it was frankly the ultimate selling point to me on the fair tax was the prebate. Without that, I probably couldn't have supported it because I said it would have been most hurtful to the people who are struggling the most. And I could never go there. But the prebate is what just made me say, wow, this really does work. This empowers people who need to be empowered. But yet, on the other end of the spectrum, people who have risked their capital and made heavy investments in stocks and bonds and savings, they're not penalized because they're trying to be productive. What kind of economic system is it where we penalize productivity and we subsidize irresponsibility? And that's what we do in this country.
Two questions for Governor Huckabee, so let's see it. Yes, ma'am.
Why can't you endorse the fair tax?
Oh, I am. I'm endorsing the fair tax. What I'm saying is the fair tax organization cannot endorse a candidate because it's a 501c3 organization. So the organization, its members can, its activists can support me, hint, hint. But the organization cannot formally endorse any candidate because of its tax status, which again I say, get rid of the IRS, and that goes out the window. I'm so tired of whether it's an educational organization or a church or anybody else being told, oh, don't say that because you can get in trouble with the IRS. Let's get rid of it, and then there's nobody to get in trouble with. But that's what I'm saying. No, I do endorse the fair tax. And what I think we're both, John mentioned it, and I'm saying is, the organization can't endorse me, but I endorse the organization, and I endorse the proposal. And by the way, the organization operates with an extraordinary level of integrity, and it's not difficult to endorse it or the proposal, so I do. support term limits. I'm one of the few people that believed in term limits before I got elected and continue to believe in them after. We passed a term limits bill in 1992 in Arkansas. The limits are 6 years for House members, 8 years for senators. We already had term limits on the constitutional officers, 8 years. The reason I served 10 and a half was because I was lieutenant governor when my predecessor was told he had the right to remain silent. And so when he was led away, I finished out his 2.5 years, and then I was reelected twice. So, no, I believe in term limits. I think, we can argue and negotiate how long those term limits are, whether 6 is enough or it should have been 10 or 12. But the point is, in my state, the ones who said it should have been 12, my answer is, then you should have taken initiative as legislators and done it when the people were demanding it. You didn't. You let it get on the ballot. And on the ballot, it was 6 years, so either live with it or you go out to the people and get it done the same way. But let me tell you why I like it. Because let me finish up here, but just to tell you, it's not just that I'm arbitrary. A lot of people have said, but we lose all this vast experience. Oh, really? Well, here's what that vast experience ends up. The longer people stay, the more entrenched they become, and the more they begin to feel like that it is their kingdom, not ours. The less they're in touch with us, and the more they're in touch with each other and with the people who are in power. I've heard people say that term limits gives lobbyists and bureaucrats more power. Let me tell you why that is the polar opposite of the truth. I saw it firsthand, because I've been in state government 3 years as lieutenant governor, 10 and a half as a governor. So let me tell you the real story. When a guy first gets elected, chances are he ran against the system. Have you ever heard a guy say, if you elect me, this never held office before, if you elect me, I'm going to go and not do a darn thing to change the system? Has anyone ever heard a speech like that from a guy running for office? No, everybody runs for office says, if you elect me, here are the things I'm going to change. So everyone runs to change things, to make it better and to improve it. I've never heard a person say, elect me and I'm going to become the ultimate insider as quick as I can. People always say, elect me because I'm the ultimate outsider. So everybody goes into office anticipating that they're going to be aloof and apart from that system that they're running against. Now, when they get there, they're pretty skeptical of the bureaucrats, the lobbyists. They're pretty skeptical of the whole system. And they tend to, when told this is the way it is, they say, why? They question. Now, after they've been there a few years, they don't ask those questions quite as harshly. Good or bad, I'm just telling you. In the early days of their political careers, and this is true of all of us, we tend to listen to the folks at the barber shop, the folks sitting around at the dinner table with us, because after all, we're closer to them than we are to those folks in the Capitol. We've just spent a year or more running against those guys in the Capitol. We've gotten there with the help of the people out there in the barber shop. The longer we stay, the more distance we become from the folks in the barber shop and the coffee shop, and the more entrenched we become with the folks down at the Capitol. The reason term limits work is because it keeps people tied to their roots and where they came from. And so, again, I still believe term limits are a good thing. And if the current crop in Congress is evident of what experience does, then God help us, we don't need that much more experience anymore. Okay, we'll take 4 instead of 2 in this one, and then I'll take the
Absolutely.
One of the reasons I'm so passionate about the fair tax is the IRS, but I also have 5 children, I'm self-employed,
Yeah.
and I also see a coming economic crisis. The retirees and all of us that still work having to pay for that, and my children that will be soon paying for that. What plans do you have to help avert that? Hopefully the fair tax will help with that, but there has got to be other things to go along with that.
Well, the reason the fair tax is the best proposal is that it doesn't, again, go through and assume that tax reform means a tap of the hammer and a couple of twists of a screwdriver, a piece of duct tape, and a little bubble gum, to hold it together. And that's what we normally get with people talk. When people talk tax reform, they're really not talking about tax reform. They're talking about tax tinkering. If our system could really improve with some tinkering, we could all get behind that. It'd be easier to do. But that's not what we need. We need a national tea party. And I think we're getting pretty darn close to it. You're talking about raising kids. Right now, the tax system penalizes you for being married and raising kids, saving money for their college, trying to put money aside so that you can pay for their car insurance. And by the way, as a father who's had 3 children, now all of them are grown, 30, 27, and 25, let me tell you something. There's 2 things you can't save enough money for, and that's college and car insurance, no matter what anybody tells you. But the point is, right now, our system penalizes you the harder you work. If you take on a second job for him, well, we're going to put you in a new tax bracket. We don't really come after you now, because after all, we don't really want you to be successful, and we don't want you to be providing for your family. We want you to ultimately end up saying, oh, heck, I'll just quit and stay home, and we'll get you some grants and other ways that the government will subsidize you, because we'll subsidize your irresponsibility, we'll penalize your productivity. So what we need is a tax system that says, you want to save some money? Great, save it, no penalty for that. You want to invest some money, get the dividends, and maybe do better for your kids? Great, we're not going to penalize you for that. We'll reward you for that. Now, if you want to go out and spend a whole bunch of money, fine, you can do it. It's your money. You can do whatever you want to with it. That's when you're going to pay the taxes. Save it, hold it, invest it, do something good with it. We encourage that. Blow it, fine, your freedom. But that's when we're going to come after a little piece of it. I mean, that's a system that I think everybody can understand. It's pretty darn simple. And, you know, I'm not one who's ready to give up on the big idea. And so if you ask me, well, are there pieces of this we could do? My attitude is no. Let's do it right so we don't have to keep doing it over. And that's why the fair tax is a much better proposal than going in and saying, well, let's take this piece out of that piece of it, because by the time Washington gets finished with it, we won't recognize it and it won't do what we intended it to do. Buddy, take yours.
Governor, we're sitting here talking about the future of America, and we're talking about a system that's broken and trying to replace it and what have you. Speak just a moment to another system that's broken, education.
Well, and one of the reasons that I love the fair tax is that I think it addresses a number of issues. And so I'll tie it into the context of the meeting today. Currently, if you want to save education dollars, you're penalized. If you want to use monies in some ways, there's no advantage. There would be under fair tax. We clearly have an educational crisis in this country. I'm probably the only candidate running that I know of who's led a state for 10.5 years and has some measured results to show for what we did. And if you look at anybody's results, from Education Week magazine to the Correct Foundation, who said we did more in 5 years than had been done in the previous 50, look at education reform in my own state, and you're going to see some of the most dramatic changes. And here's what we did. First, we said we're going to increase the standards, not lower them. If you want excellence, you put the goal higher, not lower. If you want people to do better, you don't make it easier, you make it harder. And you challenge them at the point at which they're stretched. The same way it is of your own physical muscles. If you want to do better, you don't do less activity, you do more activity. That's how you get stronger. So the first thing, higher standards. The second thing, you measure. You don't know how well you're doing unless you turn the scoreboard on and keep score. The reason I think keeping score is important is because it's the only way we know whether we're hitting the mark. It's one thing to say we've set the goal higher, but you don't really know if you're doing anything about it unless you keep score and find out how well are you hitting that new goal. So you measure. The third thing, you have accountability. You know, at the University of South Carolina, or any other university for that matter, if a football coach has a consistently losing record, what do you do with him?
Pay him off.
That's the university question. No, we fire him. No, we may pay him off, but the point is we get rid of him. That's what we do. We get a new coach. We get a new coach. If the coach didn't bring some victories, we get a new coach. What do we do in the education system? We just keep them around. No wonder we have a mess in our hands. 2 students every 60 seconds drop out. 2 students every 60 seconds. We now are at the point where 30% of the kids in this country are not even going to finish school. And let me ask you something. Do you believe it's because they're dumb? No, they're bored. And I'll tell you another secret. It's not just the dropouts that worry me. That bothers me a lot that 2 kids every 60 seconds are quitting. But here's what's sad. For everyone that quits, there are a bunch of others that get graduated that spent most of their school career taking the most expensive nap in America at billions of dollars of expense of your taxpayer money with their heads on their desks. They were sound asleep, and they were sound asleep because they were bored stiff, sitting in a classroom where someone told them to sit down, shut up, be still, be quiet, put their nose in a book of black and white type, and they're living in a world of color and activity and computer-generated all kinds of information and messages, and we put them in a traditional classroom in a Carnegie unit environment and tell them, learn. And we wonder why they don't. Good heavens, people. I'm not the smartest guy in the whole world, but I can figure this one out. We've got to change the system. And part of it is, yes, we want math and we want reading and we want science, but I'll tell you what we also need. We need music and art curriculum for every kid because we need creativity. We don't just need data transfer. We've got to also have the process going on. If a computer is filled with a great database, but it doesn't have a good processor, it's not much of a computer. Greatest database in the world won't be of any use if the processor isn't capable of dealing with the data. If we don't develop both the left and the right sides of the kid's brain as they're coming up through the education system, we don't have an education system. We only have a data download for a few kids who are traditional enough in their thinking that they can take the input. But even then, they don't know what to do with it. If we're going to change the world, be competitive in the world, if we're going to beat the Indians, the Chinese, and everybody else in this globe in terms of what we're going to do in the next generation, we better be able to create kids who not only have information, but who can do creative things with it. And that's why the curriculum has to be broad, thorough, rigorous, challenging, and we measure, and when we don't get the results, we demand them, and we get rid of the people who aren't giving it to us, and we bring others into the system. We pass laws in our state where we have the power to fire an entire school board and the superintendent, and we've done it not once but multiple times, where we literally walk in and say, nope, you guys are not getting the job done. Your kids are failing, they're not making a grade. There's no way that we're going to keep spending millions of dollars pouring money into this school district that's failing these kids. So school board, you're fired. Superintendent, you're fired. And we'll bring a team in here until this thing can run both financially sound and make an academic success of it. We've got to get serious about it. And there are many other things, and I won't go into the whole program because it kind of goes beyond maybe the fair tax argument. But let me just say that I don't know of anybody who's in the fair tax movement that isn't concerned not only about how the money comes into the Treasury, but also concerned about how the money goes out. And there's not a greater part of your money, at least the state level, going out than is the education. In my state, 70% of our state budget was spent on education if you include K through 12 and higher ed. 70%. Now, 7 cents out of every dollar is going to be spent in education. Don't you think we not only ought to be concerned about how it gets to us, but what we do with it? So that's why vigilant citizens are the key. I want to just end by telling you how much I appreciate your willingness to be soldiers for the cause. Just know you've got somebody out there who's going to be, as long as I can stay in this presidential race, and I hope it's all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But let me tell you this, there's not a better opportunity for us than right now. Congress approval rating is lower than it's ever been in history. It's 14%. I'm amazed it's that high, given what they're doing right now, so little. But 14 is the lowest in history. There is a total breakdown of confidence that people have in the government. So it's a great opportunity for us to show that a citizens' movement can really and truly happen. And if, there are skeptics who think that we can't see the fair tax, and there are plenty of those. And they're particularly the ones sitting around in Washington, these well-lit desks on television, and they will harump their way through telling us why that this will never happen, and it'll never be something enacted. And, I just kind of like the challenge of being able to one day ask them just not to bother sending in their check to the IRS. I'd love to have it. This is how I like to remind people what fair tax would mean. Wouldn't it be great if not only you got your whole paycheck every time you earned it? Wouldn't it be great if April 15th was just another beautiful spring day in America, and not a day you dive through those shoe boxes filled with little pieces of paper and receipts and all that stuff, stay up half the night and lick stamps and rush down to the post office so that you can pay Uncle Sugar that last installment. And then, so sad, many Americans will get their little check back, and they'll jump up and down with glee and they'll say, wow, look, I got $300 back. And you want to say, dude, what did you pay in?